I froze the moment I saw him standing by the window, sunlight catching his hair just the way I remembered from years ago. And for a second I couldn't breathe, my heart pounding as if it had recognized him before my mind did. And I realized I had no idea what to say. I hadn't expected to see him here, not now, not like this, after all the time that had passed. And yet there he was, holding a cup of coffee, staring out at the street, calm, almost serene, while inside me chaos swirled, memories flooding every corner of my mind, laughter, late-night talks, the way he used to make me feel seen and understood, the plans we had once made together that never came to be. And now I had to stand here and pretend I wasn't completely undone. But before I could gather my thoughts, a small voice called from behind him, and I turned slowly to see a boy, no more than 10, standing at the doorway, eyes wide, staring at me with curiosity and something else I couldn't place. And I realized instantly that this was his son, a life I had never known, a part of him I had never met. And suddenly the whole situation shifted, the air itself charged with an energy I hadn't expected. And his father turned, and his eyes met mine, and I saw that same shock mirrored in them, as if we were both suspended in a moment that had been waiting for years to happen. And the boy stepped forward, hesitant at first, then firm, and said, "She's the one, isn't she?" And I froze because somehow he knew, and we both stared at him, mouths slightly open, hearts racing in ways that words could not reach. And then his father gave a small, almost nervous smile, the kind that hides too many emotions, and asked if I wanted coffee, as if we could pretend this was ordinary, as if our past could just fold into the present like that. And I nodded, trying to steady myself, and we walked into the kitchen, the boy leading the way, and he talked constantly about school, about his favorite cartoons, about small victories and little dreams, and I laughed because it was impossible not to. And yet every word reminded me of everything I had missed, every quiet moment I had once imagined with him that now belonged to someone else. And I noticed how much he resembled his father, the same tilt of the head when he smiled, the same flicker in his eyes when he was curious. And I felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and longing, a sense that life had somehow conspired to bring us back to this point, but not in the way I expected. And then his father poured coffee, hands trembling slightly, and said that he wasn't sure I should have come, that he didn't know if it was right after all these years. And I swallowed hard, my throat tight, because I had asked myself the same question every single day for months. And I realized that sitting here, seeing him here, feeling the presence of this boy who held pieces of him I had never touched, I wanted to stay, wanted to see if maybe we could build something new out of the ashes of what we once had. But before I could answer, the boy looked at me, eyes serious, and said, "She should stay." And everything in the room seemed to shift again, the words simple, yet heavy with a kind of certainty that neither of us had dared to voice. And I caught the look in his father's eyes, a mixture of hope and disbelief, as if he couldn't quite believe his son had just made a choice that would change everything. And I felt my heart lift and sink at the same time, because I knew that if I said yes, nothing would ever be the same, and if I said no, I might regret it for the rest of my life. And the boy ran ahead to the living room, showing me a drawing he had done of our family, the lines imperfect but full of love. And I realized that this small human had opened a door I had long thought closed, had invited me into a life I hadn't imagined for myself. And we spent the afternoon talking, the boy asking questions, sharing stories, his laughter ringing through the house. And I found myself laughing too, more freely than I had in years, and every glance between us carried the weight of unspoken words, of past regrets, and future possibilities. And I noticed how comfortable it felt, the three of us together, a new rhythm forming without any of us planning it. And yet my heart kept whispering that this was only the beginning, that something deeper was stirring. And as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting golden light through the windows, I realized I had to leave soon, and a part of me dreaded it, because walking away now might undo the fragile connection that had just begun to form. And I glanced at him, standing by the doorway, hands in his pockets, trying to look casual, and I saw the same hesitation in his eyes, the unspoken question lingering between us. And then his son tugged at his hand and asked if I was coming back tomorrow, and I froze again, the words so simple yet carrying the weight of everything. And his father gave me a look, half apology, half hope, and I nodded slowly, unable to speak. And when I turned to leave, the boy ran up to me and handed me a small note he had scribbled, words shaky but heartfelt, and I unfolded it in the car, reading, "I like you being here, I hope you stay." And I felt my chest tighten with a mixture of joy and fear, because in that single note lay a choice I couldn't ignore, a path I had to consider. And I drove home in silence, the note clutched in my hand, the streets passing in a blur, every memory and feeling swirling together. And I realized that my life had just shifted subtly yet irrevocably, in a way that neither of us had anticipated, and that boy with his innocence and certainty had just rewritten everything, and I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew that I wanted to find out, and as I reached my driveway, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink, I couldn't shake the thought that sometimes life surprises you in the smallest ways, and sometimes the people you think are gone forever have a way of stepping back into your life at the exact moment you need them most. And I sat in my car a long moment, staring at the note, thinking about him, thinking about the boy, thinking about the possibilities, and a small smile crept across my face because for the first time in a long time I felt hope. But then my phone buzzed with a message from him and my heart stopped, because it wasn't what I expected, and the words on the screen read, "Can you come back tonight? There's something you need to see," and I gripped the steering wheel, mind racing because I had no idea what awaited me, and I knew that whatever it was, nothing would ever be the same again, and that one decision, one small visit, had set the stage for something I couldn't yet understand, and the anticipation, the uncertainty, and the hope all collided in a single heartbeat, leaving me breathless and wondering what life had planned next. I could still remember the first time we met, the day everything changed without either of us realizing it. I had walked into that little bookstore on a rainy afternoon, dripping wet, frustrated with the chaos of the city, and he was there in the corner, crouched over a stack of books, completely absorbed, and for a moment I hesitated, unsure if I should interrupt, but he looked up, caught my gaze and smiled, a smile that made the room feel warmer, like the rain outside had never existed, and we started talking about a book I had picked up, just a simple discussion about characters and plot, but it turned into an hour-long conversation that made it feel like minutes, and I remember thinking I had never met anyone who understood me so quickly, who could laugh at the same things, who could see the world in colors I hadn't noticed before. And from that day on we were inseparable, the kind of connection that didn't need constant words, where a look or a touch could convey entire conversations. And I remember the nights we stayed out late, wandering through quiet streets, talking about everything and nothing, dreaming about futures we thought we had all the time to build, and the mornings we spent making coffee together, laughing at burnt toast and spilled milk, our fingers brushing and sending sparks that neither of us could explain. And the way he would sit and listen to me when I was upset, really listen without judgment, without rushing, and I realized that in him I had found not just a friend, but someone who made life feel more vivid, more possible, and I could see it in his eyes too, the same wonder and warmth mirrored back at me. And it was intoxicating, the way we fit together, the way our conversations flowed, the way silence was comfortable, never awkward. And yet somewhere along the way everything began to shift, small things at first, misunderstandings that could have been cleared up with a few words, messages left unsent, pride getting in the way. And I remember the day we last spoke before everything changed. I had misunderstood something he said, taken it wrong, reacted too sharply, and instead of talking it through we let the silence grow. Weeks turned into months and distance filled the space that used to be laughter, and we both assumed the other had moved on, that the chance had passed, and I still remember sitting in my apartment that night, staring at the phone, wondering if I should call, knowing I probably should, but fear and stubbornness held me back, and on his side I imagined him doing the same, wondering if I had forgotten, if I had even cared, and for months I carried that weight, the what-ifs, the memories that refused to fade, and yet here we were years later, standing in his kitchen, his son drawing at the table, and it felt as if time had folded in on itself, the past and present colliding in a way that was dizzying and tender all at once. And I remembered the little things that had made us laugh, the shared glances during movies, the way he would finish my sentences, the way he remembered my favorite songs, and it struck me how much of him had stayed with me despite the years, how much of me had stayed with him, and I saw it in his eyes now, the unspoken acknowledgement that what we had shared hadn't disappeared. It had only been paused, waiting for the right moment to continue, and yet the mystery of his son, the little boy who had claimed I should stay, added a layer I hadn't anticipated, making the past feel even more intertwined with the present, and I found myself remembering the day he told me about his plans to move across the country, the opportunity he couldn't refuse, the promise that we would keep in touch, the letter he wrote but never sent, and how I had waited for a call that never came, assuming it was the end, not knowing it was just a pause. And as I watched him now, the way he interacted with his son, the way he glanced at me with something between hope and uncertainty, I realized that our past had always been connected to the present in ways I hadn't understood, that nothing had truly ended. And then I noticed something on the counter, A small object partially hidden, a keychain with a tiny book charm I had given him years ago, and my breath caught because it meant he had kept it all this time, that even through the silence and distance a part of him had carried me with him, and it changed everything, the misunderstanding, the distance, the months of quiet, it all seemed smaller now, less permanent, and I understood that this moment, this reunion was not just chance, it was destiny finally catching up with us, and my heart raced with a mixture of excitement and fear because I wanted to reach across the table, to touch his hand, to say all the things I had never said, and yet the boy interrupted my thoughts, holding up a drawing, asking if we could make it real, if we could try again as a family, and I realized in that instant that the past was not just a story of two people, it had become a story for three, and the decision before us was bigger than either of us alone, and as his father looked at the drawing, a small hopeful smile forming on his lips, I felt a wave of emotion I hadn't felt in years, the kind that makes you certain that love, even paused by time and distance, never truly disappears, and just as I was about to speak, to answer the silent question lingering between us, his son leaned closer, whispering something that made me freeze, something simple, innocent, yet heavy with meaning. He said that there was a secret in the attic, something his father had never told me, and the words sent a shiver down my spine, because I had no idea what awaited us, and the past that I thought I understood suddenly felt incomplete, like a puzzle missing its most important piece, and I realized that the story of us was far from over. It had layers I had yet to uncover, and as I looked at him and then at the boy, I knew that the next step, the next revelation, would change everything we thought we knew about our connection, and my heart raced with anticipation, longing, and a small, fluttering hope that what had been lost might finally be found again. That I stepped back into his living room, the light shifting across familiar furniture and yet somehow different, as if the house itself had waited all these years to hold this moment again. And he was there, leaning slightly against the doorway, eyes searching mine as if trying to read what the years had left unspoken, and for a heartbeat I was a teenager again, laughing at a silly joke, arguing about a book we both loved, feeling as though the world had paused just for us, and then reality settled back like a tide, bringing with it the weight of time, distance, and choices we had both made, and I realized how much I had missed this, the simple presence of him, the way he could make the air feel electric without a word. And he stepped closer, voice soft but steady, "I didn't think you'd come back today," and I smiled, feeling warmth and nerves at once. I couldn't stay away, I had to see if some things could be fixed, and he nodded slowly, as though acknowledging a truth we had both ignored for too long. And then his son bounded into the room, holding a small ball, eyes bright with mischief and innocence, asking if we could play, and I laughed because it felt natural, almost as if we had always done this, and as we moved together, tossing the ball back and forth, I caught glimpses of the boy's father in every motion, the way he laughed, the way he focused, the little quirks that I had loved and remembered, and suddenly it hit me how much life had moved on, how much we had missed, and yet how much had stayed the same. And as we settled onto the couch, the boy running to grab a drawing from the table to show us, he looked between us and said, "You used to be friends, didn't you?" And we shared a quiet smile because yes, we had been more than friends, though neither of us had said it aloud, and the air seemed to hold its breath as I said softly, "We were." And he nodded, eyes clouded with memory and longing, "Yes, we were." And then he leaned back, running a hand through his hair, voice low, "I didn't know if I should have hoped for this, if I should have believed we could find our way again." And I reached out, brushing my hand against his, almost by accident, and felt the spark that had never truly gone away, the warmth, the connection, the comfort of being understood without explanation. And we sat in silence, the weight of years pressing in and yet lifting at the same time. And I realized that nostalgia was more than memory, it was alive here, in this room, in this boy who held pieces of both of us, in this man who had grown and changed and yet remained the person I had once loved. And I wanted to tell him all of it, everything I had held back, every regret, every hope, every sleepless night wondering if he thought of me. But the words caught in my throat, as they often did when feelings were too big to speak, and he spoke first, breaking the quiet. "I never stopped thinking about you, even when I tried, even when I told myself it was over." And I felt my chest tighten because I had thought he hadn't noticed, that he hadn't cared. And yet here it was, the truth finally landing between us, fragile and real. And I nodded, voice trembling, "I never stopped either." And it was like the first time again, heart to heart, but layered with everything we had lost and learned. And then the boy looked at us, head tilted, and asked, "Why did you stop talking? Why didn't you tell each other?" And I realized in that moment how much silence had shaped our lives, how much fear and misunderstanding had built walls that neither of us knew how to climb. And he gave a small, almost guilty smile. "You were always scared," and I laughed softly. "Yes, I was," and he nodded as if understanding went beyond words, and I reached for a photo on the shelf, one we had taken years ago, before life moved us apart, and I ran my fingers over it, feeling the past and present collide. And he leaned closer, voice quiet. "I kept this too, every picture, every memory, every little note. I thought I had lost it all, and suddenly nothing felt lost, because we were here together, for the first time in years." And yet the boy reminded us that life moved forward, that there was more than just the past to consider, and as I looked at his father, I realized how much courage it took to be here, to confront everything we had left unsaid. And he reached for my hand again, this time intentionally, holding it firmly, and I felt a surge of hope, because touch can say what words cannot. And then he spoke again, voice almost breaking. "I don't want to lose you again." And I wanted to tell him the same, to promise that I would stay if he asked me to, but before I could, the boy interrupted with a question about dinner, laughing as he pulled us into the moment, and I realized that our connection was no longer just between the two of us, it was between three hearts now, intertwined in ways that felt natural and inevitable, and yet the weight of the past still lingered, a reminder that even in joy, there were choices to be made. And I looked at him, studying the lines of his face, the familiar curves of his smile, and I knew that the next words we spoke would change everything, could set a new course or leave the past dangling between us, unresolved and painful. And I took a deep breath, letting the tension fill the room, letting the unspoken feelings hover like a fragile bridge between us, and he did the same, eyes soft and searching, and then almost in unison we spoke, but our words were incomplete, half confessions, half questions, and the boy watched us, eyes wide with quiet understanding, and in that moment I realized that love was not always perfect or immediate, that sometimes it returned in pieces, and that it was up to us to decide if we would put them together. And just as I felt ready to speak fully, he looked away for a heartbeat, then back at me and said, "There's something you should know, something I never told you before," and I felt my heart skip, because whatever it was, it would change the way I saw everything, and I held his gaze, waiting, knowing that our story was about to take another turn, and that this reunion, filled with laughter, nostalgia, and tension, was only the beginning of a journey neither of us had fully understood. And as the room seemed to hold its breath, I realized that love, once lost, could find its way back in ways that were surprising, tender, and unforgettable, and that the next choice we made, the next truth revealed, would define what came next for all of us. That I followed him up the narrow staircase toward the attic, the floorboards creaking beneath our feet, and my heart pounded with a mix of curiosity and fear, because I had no idea what I would find or what truths might finally surface. And he paused at the top, looking at me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. "I should have told you sooner," he said quietly, almost a whisper, and I froze, knowing this was the moment the years of silence would either heal or wound us further. And I asked him, "What is it? What kept you from telling me?" And he took a deep breath, eyes flicking toward a dusty corner. And then he began, "It wasn't because I stopped caring, it wasn't because I didn't want you in my life, it was because I thought I was protecting you, protecting both of us, from a situation I didn't know how to fix." And I felt my stomach twist, because I realized for the first time that our separation had not been born from anger or indifference, but from fear and misunderstanding. And I stepped closer, voice trembling, tell me everything." And he nodded, fingers gripping the edge of the railing as though steadying himself against the weight of years. "I got an opportunity to move across the country, something I thought would change my life for the better. And I believed it was the only way to secure a future for myself and for my family, and I assumed you would understand, but when I didn't hear from you, when my calls and messages went unanswered, I convinced myself that you had moved on, that I had lost you." And I remember sitting alone in that apartment, thinking about all the words I wanted to say, the letters I wanted to write, but never did. And I realized that for years, both of us had been carrying the weight of assumptions, believing the other had abandoned them, and my voice barely above a whisper, "I never knew, I never understood." And he shook his head slightly, eyes moist. "I thought I was protecting you, but I see now I only hurt us both." And the boy peeked around the doorway, curious but sensing the gravity of our conversation, and I felt a wave of emotion, sadness for the lost time, but also a strange relief, because finally, the truth was being spoken. And I reached out, brushing my hand against his, as if to erase the years of doubt, and he took it without hesitation, holding it gently, a connection renewed in silence. And I asked, "Why didn't you write the letter?" the one you said you would, and he swallowed, voice tight. I didn't have the courage. I thought the words would make everything worse, and I realized that courage had been waiting here all along, in the room, in the boy who had unknowingly reunited us, in the quiet patience that life had offered. And I whispered, it's not too late, it's never too late, and his eyes searched mine, searching for the same hope, and then he exhaled slowly, letting go of a weight he had carried too long. I want to try, I want to make things right, and I felt a tear slip because I wanted the same, wanted to rebuild what we had lost, and yet the moment was fragile, delicate, full of potential and fear, and I knew that every word, every gesture would determine whether we could move forward or drift apart again. And then he motioned toward a small chest in the corner. I kept this for you, he said, and I opened it to find letters, sketches, and mementos from our past, untouched for years, a tangible history of a bond that had never truly ended. And I held a letter in my hands shaking, reading his words from years ago, words of love, longing, and regret. And it hit me how deeply he had cared, how he had silently hoped for a day like this. And I looked at him, voice soft but firm. All this time we were carrying each other without knowing it. And he nodded, understanding passing silently between us, a recognition that we had survived the years apart, that love had endured even through fear and distance. And then he paused, looking at me with a mixture of hope and hesitation. There's something else, he said, a truth I haven't told anyone. And I felt my heart stop, the weight of anticipation pressing down. What is it? I asked, and he hesitated, then whispered, I don't know if I should say it, it could change everything. And I leaned closer, needing to hear it, needing the final piece of the puzzle that had kept us apart for so long. And he took a shaky breath. I was afraid that telling you would scare you away, that it would ruin the chance we have now. And I reached for his hand again, reassuring him silently that whatever it was, we could face it together. And then he finally said, the reason I left, the real reason I didn't reach out, it wasn't just opportunity, it wasn't just fear, it was a family situation I couldn't explain at the time, something I thought you wouldn't understand. And I felt my pulse quicken, heart racing with both dread and hope. Tell me, I urged, please. And he looked at me, eyes searching for the courage I already held. I had to take care of something, something that couldn't wait, and I thought I had to do it alone, and I didn't want you to get hurt or involved. And in that moment I realized that his silence, our separation, had not been abandonment but sacrifice. And my chest tightened, because love had always been here, hidden beneath misunderstanding and years of quiet. And I whispered, I understand now, and he shook his head slightly, voice trembling. I don't know if you can really understand. And I held his gaze steady. I will, I promise. And just as relief began to wash over me, the boy's voice called from below, Dad, come see this. And I felt the tug of present and past intertwining, and he looked down the stairs, eyes wide, a mixture of pride and worry. And I realized that this moment, this confrontation, had not only revealed the hidden truth, it had set the stage for a choice we could no longer avoid, because now we had to decide whether to let the past define us or embrace the possibility of a future. And he turned back to me, voice low but certain, are you ready to know everything, to face it together? And my heart pounded, mind racing, knowing that the answer I gave in the next breath would shape the rest of our story. And as I nodded, a mixture of fear, hope, and love swirling in me, the air seemed to hold its breath, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The moment the truth was out, the weight that had hung over us for years seemed to lift slightly, leaving space for something new. And I saw him exhale, the tension in his shoulders easing as if he had carried a mountain for too long and finally found a place to set it down. And I realized that what had kept us apart was not lack of love but fear that had grown into silence. And now the silence was gone, replaced by honesty and possibility. And we sat together on the old couch, the boy at our feet, drawing quietly, his small presence a gentle reminder of life's unexpected ways of bringing people back together. And I reached for his hand, feeling the familiar warmth that had never really left, and he took it without hesitation, squeezing gently, as if acknowledging everything we had been through and everything that lay ahead. And we began to talk, really talk, about the years apart, about our regrets, our hopes, and the dreams we still held. And the words flowed more easily than I expected, laughter mingling with quiet tears, because honesty has a way of softening hearts. And I realized that forgiveness was not a single act but a process, a slow unraveling of old hurts replaced by understanding and compassion. And he admitted he had been scared of losing me, scared of making mistakes. And I told him that I had felt the same, that distance and misunderstanding had not diminished my care. And in that moment, the boy looked up at us, eyes bright, and asked if we could go to the park tomorrow. and we both nodded, smiling, because it felt like the beginning of something we had both longed for, a chance to live fully together again. And then he stood, walking to the window, looking out at the golden light of late afternoon, and he told me he had kept something for me all these years, something that had reminded him of our bond even when we were apart, and he handed me a small envelope, worn at the edges, and inside was a letter he had written long ago, a letter he had never sent because he wasn't ready, and as I read the words, filled with hope, longing, and unwavering affection, I felt tears fill my eyes, because it was proof that love had endured, even when hidden, even when delayed. And I realized that sometimes life does not give closure in the way we expect, but it gives second chances, subtle nudges toward what we are meant to rediscover. And the boy leaned against his father's leg, holding our hands together, a quiet symbol of connection and continuity, and I understood that our story was no longer just ours, it was ours as a family, a bond strengthened by honesty and forgiveness, and we spent the evening in calm conversation, sharing stories, laughter, and dreams, the kind of peaceful moments that make you feel grounded, whole, and fully present. And then he showed me a small photo album he had made, filled with pictures of the boy, of our past moments captured unintentionally, and he smiled, saying that he wanted us to have these memories, to remember not only what was lost but what could be found again. And I felt my heart swell, because it was more than a gesture, it was a promise, a commitment to love and care beyond the obstacles life had placed. And as night fell, we stepped outside into the cool air, the boy running ahead, laughter echoing down the quiet street, and we followed, hand in hand, feeling the simplicity and purity of the moment. And he looked at me, eyes reflecting both gratitude and hope, and whispered that he was ready to live openly, to embrace the love we had both carried for so long. And I smiled, squeezing his hand, ready in the same way, ready to move forward without fear, without doubt, because we had faced the past and emerged stronger. And then he reached into his pocket, pulling out a small key, handing it to me with a shy smile. "This is for you," he said. "It's the key to the little cabin we used to dream about, the place where we talked about everything." And I took it, feeling the weight and promise in my palm, and I realized that love is sometimes found in gestures, small but significant, and it does not fade, it waits quietly, patiently until it can be fully realized. And the boy hugged us both, whispering that he was happy, and in that embrace I felt everything settle, all the tension, all the longing, all the uncertainty finally transforming into hope, belonging, and the quiet certainty that we were exactly where we were meant to be. And as we walked back inside, the house filled with warmth and the soft glow of lamplight, I knew that the story we had begun so long ago had reached a new chapter, one of trust, love, and shared moments. And when I looked at him, I saw not only the man I had loved years ago but the person who had grown, who had waited and risked and forgiven. And I whispered softly, "I am here fully," and he replied with a simple smile, "I know." And in that instant, surrounded by laughter, light, and the quiet heartbeat of home, I understood that love, when true, never truly leaves, it only waits for the right moment to return. And the final image that lingered in my mind was the boy holding the small key between us, a symbol of memory, hope, and new beginnings. And I felt my heart soar, knowing that whatever came next, we would face it together. And as the night wrapped around us, peaceful and complete, I realized that some stories do not end with loss or regret. They end with the quiet, breathtaking recognition that love always finds its way home.